traveling the world, looking into what's really going on for over 25 years. He's a multiple best-selling author. He's spoken at Wembley Arena. He's spoken all around the world. He, of course, as I mentioned several times in the last couple of weeks, is going to be on the road again next year in 2017. All of the information where to see him can be found at davidicke.com. He's also been working on a book. He's been recording the audio version of that. He's been up to his bloody tonsils. Let's welcome back to the programme and thank him for coming on, our great friend and probably the biggest champion of the independent media there's ever been, David Icke. David, welcome back. How are you?
I'm good, Rich.
Listen, can we, before we get into Paris and all of that, what's been going on with Facebook in the last couple of days? You want to talk about that for a second?
Well, it's interesting because it's appropriate that I've been banned for 5 days for posting an image which was based on information in the Jerusalem Post and with my opinion of what I thought of it. And note that, an opinion. And it's kind of interesting that this ban should happen amid all that's going on and the fact that we need to constantly give another version of events that people can see. But it's also appropriate given what's happened in Paris, because we are in what you might call a squeeze here. On one side, you have the massive efforts to put the population in terror and fear. And people who are in that state of emotion will almost always give their power away to anyone or anything they think can protect them from what they've been manipulated to fear. So that's one side of the squeeze. And obviously the ante is being upped all the time. And the other side is they have to do everything they can to stop these events, which are becoming more and more blatant. And there's no question, like you say, I've been doing this now for 25 years. So I've seen how it was and I've seen how it is. And you must have come across the same conclusion. Far, far more people are grasping the concepts of things like what I called a long time ago problem, reaction, solution. And once you grasp that, you can see these events in a completely different light to the one that's being sold through the mainstream media. So minds are opening now in ever greater numbers, and I see this all the time, every day, to another version of what's actually happening. Now that is the cabal's worst nightmare, because it's a perception deception. That's what it's all based on. That's what Paris is actually about at its core, at its foundation. And perception comes from information and the processing of that information into a perception, which comes into a behavior, into an action or a non-action, depending on the perception. So the last thing they want is for this now massive alternative media in all its facets and forms to be in there the moment these things happen, putting them in a different context, putting them in a different light. And so you have this squeeze. On one side, these events to frighten people, to get them in terror so they give their power away to those who are truly behind them. And on the other side, to block in every way you can. Financially, they're trying to do it. In straight censorship, they're trying to do it. They're trying to equate. You can see it hear it in the language and see it in the legislation. They're trying to equate extremism with people exposing the truth about what's going on. And it's a desperate attempt to hold the increasingly ludicrous official narrative in the only way they can, and that is to exclude the alternative narrative to what's going on. And, I've been saying all these years, even many, I would say even most people who are in the alternative media, well, I'd say the vast majority still, while they can see so much, they can't see the depth to which this goes. It is extraordinary. When people, if they choose to read this next book that I've just finished, just about to go to the printers, then the depth goes even deeper than ever before. And therefore, even the alternative media often find it difficult to grasp the fine detail within which this is played out. And this fine detail is possible because of what I talk about in the book, what's actually really, really behind it. So when you look at this cabal, this spider from which it's all coming, and it's a perception deception, then does anyone really believe that a now gigantic global communications network like Facebook is not going to be controlled by these people? I mean, hello? These internet giant companies like Facebook, like Google, massively Google, the monster Google, which of course is fundamentally involved in the transhumanist agenda, which I exposed at a level I don't think has been exposed before in this new book, and what it's really about. And you look at these giant communication internet companies, and not only that, others like Amazon, and you look at who owns them, and it's invariably Zionists. And what is happening here in all these areas, Richie, whether it's Amazon with sales of products, particularly books, or communication through social media, through Facebook, or internet communication through Google. This has been the plan all along, and it's unfolding now. Stage one, you start. You then work with a smiling face. Hey, I wear a T-shirt. I'm one of you. Cool. Is that cool? Yeah, cool. And you create a monopoly or near monopoly on your particular function. And you're a smiling face, then, oh, yeah, man. And you're Amazon. Oh, yeah, we've got all these books. Oh, and I've got more products now. Now we've got more products and more products and more products. Now we're selling everything. And then, this is where it's going. When they have that monopoly, then the smiling face ceases to smile. Then the tyranny comes out. Then, having got a monopoly on book publication and book distribution, Amazon then starts dictating what books can be distributed, even published in the end, and what can't. And we're now seeing the smiling face just starting to change with Facebook, but nowhere near where it's designed to go, and with Google too, whereby they're starting to censor. You look at all the Facebook crap when they were building this near monopoly that I'm talking about, and it's all free flow of information. We want to get information out to people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now more and more and more people are finding that as they get more confident with the monopoly or near monopoly, they then start to become what they were always going to be in the end. Interestingly, this week, in fact, on the very day that I had this 5-day ban, and if people go to davidicke.com and see what I was banned for, you can see how blatant and outrageous it is.
Yeah, it's outrageous, yeah.
RT ran a story of member of the public who wrote on their Facebook page that while everything that what went on in Paris was outrageous, it was, But how about the same outrage for the bomb in Lebanon? This was what she was writing about, and they just deleted it, Facebook. And it was only when RT went along and said, "What are you doing?" They said, "Oh no, it was a mistake." No, it wasn't a mistake. You've just been caught out, and it's so outrageous you've got nowhere to go. So you put it back and say, "Oh no, it was just an error." No, it wasn't. It's the way we're going. I at the moment, Richie, I've got events in Sydney, Melbourne, and up Brisbane, Gold Coast area of Australia in place for next July. And I've been to Australia before, last time in 2011 when I went all over the place. There's always a problem getting a visa. It always takes a little while. It always has to go to the government to be, decreed, and it takes longer. So this time, just to show how this is starting to move, this time Jamie will be my son, who's coming with me, who's helping to organise it. He asked for a visa online. Bang, 2 minutes, he got it. Must have been no more than 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and it came. Me, no, turned down.
That's outrageous.
And they said the only thing you can do is to try this other tack. And now we've been going for weeks, and the Australian government absolutely know what my material is, what I say, what I stand for. But they're now asking for what I'm going to say. They're asking for they're asking for everything, Richie. And I'm only just exaggerating, except my favourite baby food at 18 months.
Imagine
they want all my previous employment, on and on it goes, and it's all a farce because what you're dealing with is children. That's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with children in adult bodies. Goes all the way through the system. And so they're trying to get me to jump through all these hoops, and they're desperately, as they have before, but they're trying harder this time, they're desperately trying to find a reason to stop me going. And, this is a very profound point, because we can fall into the trap when things like Paris happen, that the power is with this group of man-children, women-children. You look at Facebook; it's run by a man-child, isn't it?
If it is, that is.
Mark Zuckerberg is running Facebook. Anyone believe that? What?
No.
Mark Zuckerberg, incidentally, who was caught on a live microphone at the UN very recently, having a conversation with Germany's Chancellor Merkel about how to block posts on Facebook in Germany complaining about all the migrants pouring. This is what we're dealing with. It's a movie we're watching, and if we buy the movie, then we've lost the plot. And what journalists are really are movie correspondents. All they're doing is describing the movie. But what I was saying about this profound point about power, I'm sitting here now in a tiny little room, which is my office, in a one-bedroom flat in Ryde. I'm sitting at a computer, and every day I work there turning out information, right? Now, the Australian government is it's all powerful, isn't it, in Australia? The Australian government, 13,000 miles away from where I'm sitting now, and it's powerful. This is where the power is. It's in government. And yet they're frightened to let me into their country because they're frightened of information for the very, very reason that I spoke about earlier. The reason there's this war on the alternative media now through censorship and through financially suppressing them is because they're terrified of information, because lies are always frightened of the truth.
Yeah, that's right.
And tyrannies are always frightened of the truth. And that's what we're dealing with. And so, we have the power if only we would realize it. Facebook are trying to shut me up. Look at Facebook, multi-billion-dollar company. They're worried about little me sitting here in Rye, turning out, pictures with words on them and stories and stuff. They are little children in adult bodies. We have to see them like that. I'm not frightened of the Australian government. Doesn't frighten me a bit. I want to get there as fast as I can. What happens there won't frighten me. But I will frighten the Australian government. Where is the power? Come on, let's see it. The dynamic is not the power dynamic that we're sold. And therefore, we have the power to change this. And when people are listening and they say, what can I do? Well, there's one thing that's happening, which is affecting you. It's affecting many people. And that is YouTube, which is, of course, part of Google. Again, Zionist-owned YouTube. They are not what they call monetizing videos. So people that make videos can earn a bit of and it is a bit of a living.
Yeah, it's tiny. It is tiny,
yeah. But what they're doing now is they're saying, no, we're not monetizing that. And they're giving ludicrous reasons for it, brackets see Facebook and me, because it's about squeezing them financially. What they've done is they've looked at the alternative media and they've thought, how can we dismantle this? How can we disempower this? Okay, we're going there with the money, we're going there with the censorship. And what's coming along and what they're planning is to make it illegal. This may sound fantastic now, but they're talking about it, to make it illegal to post a link to another website without their permission. I mean, this is where we're going. And again, that is so outrageous and so ludicrous for one reason. It's desperate. These people are desperate because they will have seen, they miss nothing. Because it's a perception deception, they're constantly tracking public reaction to things, public perception and changes of perception. And so they will look at these problem reaction solution events. They go back to 9/11, for instance, and others before. And they will look at the public reaction, which was basically to buy the whole official story, lock, stock and barrel, almost in its entirety in terms of the public.
Yeah, guilty. I'm guilty as charged, by the way.
Then you look at what's happened here over Paris. Clearly, the majority are buying it, but the minority not buying it is getting larger and larger. And it's getting larger simply because the alternative media has been giving another version of events, another angle from which you can see it. And when you then start to build the constantly common themes, like we've seen in Paris, there's a passport found, a Syrian passport apparently this time, next to the body of a suicide bomber who's just blown himself up. It was kind of interesting to see a comment on the internet, which was, it was supposed to be like an ironic joke, but it was actually very profound. It said, "Can you send me all your passports so I can build a bomb shelter?" Right?
Yeah.
Because they're obviously indestructible. And then you lock into these patterns, and as these patterns keep repeating, and they have to kind of repeat them because they're trying to sell a lie. You can always pick holes in their narrative because it's not true.
It's a lie. It's a lie. Yeah.
So you have the passport found in Paris, miraculously surviving. You have the passport found in Vestry Street on the site of Ground Zero, the time of 9/11, which was apparently a passport from one of the hijackers who was in, with his passport, a fireball that crashed into the World Trade Center. And the FBI, New York police, they held a press conference to say they'd found this passport. And I watched a BBC newsreader tell me this without laughing. that this had happened. A year later, an ITV crew doing a year later documentary on 9/11 asked about the passport, and they were told it was a rumor that might be true. No, it was a lie. Why? Because it's a perception deception. They know that most people don't grasp detail. They grasp an image. What they're selling is an image. So the passport was just a rumor that might be true. It was a lie a year later, but at the time, because a year later it doesn't matter because they've got what they want. They're into Afghanistan and et cetera, et cetera.
And people don't remember. You're right.
Yeah, they don't remember because
right.
this is what they're founding their deception on, that people don't remember. Now, what the alternative media is doing is being their memory. It's saying, hold on a minute, this is what they said before. So you had this passport. I mean, was it singed? I mean, what condition?
It was, yeah. It was a bit singed.
Unbelievable,
yeah.
ludicrous.
Yeah.
And then you had 7/7 in 2005.
Hey, just before you mentioned 7/7, they used to make videos at one time. They didn't need passports. They used to say that these suicide bombers would make a video before going on the suicide mission. And in the video, they would say, I am Salah al-Safal, or whatever. He would name himself, and he would say, I'm going to kill the infidels, and here's my video, and that's all. So, and then they migrated to this, where they're carrying their passports so that they can be identified. And I'd kind of forgotten that. I'd forgotten about the videos. See, you talked about people forgetting stuff. I forget stuff. They used to make videos. Why have they stopped making videos before heading out?
Yeah, and you know, this is another thing.
Yeah.
When you get into video technology now, and what is possible, you can make a video seem to say anything.
Yeah.
I mean, you can take Bin Laden, you can put him through a computer system, and he can say whatever you bloody want him to say.
And they probably did. Some of the stuff Bin Laden, yeah, we remember that, yeah.
In 2005 at 7/7, there was a guy called Jermaine Lindsay who blew himself up. He blew himself up in a tube. This is the official story. They found his passport, his driving license, and his mobile phone insurance.
Holy,
what?
Yeah.
But you see, you haven't got a mainstream media that is saying to people that announce this, excuse me, hold on a second, how is that possible? It's never asked. It's just accepted. The alternative media asks those questions, and that's why this war is there.
Question for you then, my friend. Sorry to interrupt you.
9/11, you see, you was a classic. You had Qurans left all over the place. These supposed to be extreme Muslims. What they're leaving their Quran in hotel rooms for? It's all a perception deception. Oh, you see, honey, it was them Arabs, them Muslims. They left a Quran in a hotel room. Come and look, honey. It's just telling lies. And 9/11 was a wonderful example of how you can machine gun lies into the public mind, and they are believed because they're not questioned, and they're not dot connected so that the contradictions and the anomalies can be seen.
Can I ask you a question on that? Because this is really important. You, not to be kissing your backside, but you spent years at the BBC. I mean, when the BBC was the greatest broadcasting organisation in the world in terms of standards and professionalism, you guys were the smoothest presenters ever. Sports and news, and I'm not just saying that, you were. There's videos of David on YouTube presenting snooker live to 20 million people after Songs of Praise on a Sunday. Terrific broadcasting. So tell me this, David. So I've had a bit of a go at BBC Radio 5 Live because I happen to listen to them anyway. Do you think that those thoughts occur to them? Is Rachel Burden or Nikki Campbell, is it occurring to them, Jesus, this is all a bit much now? Or does it not occur to them? Have they been so mired in it that it just doesn't occur to them? Or are they actually suppressing their own instincts to go, hang on a second there, could you repeat that? What do you think?
Well, there will be some that will be the latter, and they will be the tiny few. The biggest problem with the mainstream media is not manipulation, though there's tons of that. It's ignorance. These people are completely ignorant of world events in their true context. They live in a bubble. Anyone who's worked in a newsroom, it's a bubble, just like the Houses of Parliament is a bubble. They have their own sources of information. It comes up on the teleprinter. It comes up from the wire services and the news agencies. It comes from the newsroom television, on the rolling news of other broadcasters. And therefore, if you're a journalist, when you go to work, you're reading the morning papers, you're reading what's coming up off the wire services and the agencies, you're seeing what's on the rolling news on the television. We talk about programming and perception programming. All these people get, unless they do their own research, and virtually none of them do, is the official story of everything, every working day, indeed more than that. And so they are programmed more profoundly with the official version of everything than even the general public are. And then you've got this carrot and stick situation, whereby if you try to challenge the official story while you're doing your job and you step over the line, well, you're not doing your job for very much longer. I remember Peter Sissons, who, of course, was a news reader on ITN and the BBC for decades. And he left the BBC in the end in disgust, and he wrote a book about his experiences. And his a whole kind of angle on this, or his microcosm of the macrocosm, if you like, was global warming. Because he actually was a journalist who looked at the evidence and thought, well, how can it be global warming when temperatures aren't rising?
Yeah.
And he tells in the book how he was interviewing the leader then of the Green Party, Caroline Lucas, someone I knew way back in the 80s when I was in the Green Party. And he just said to her, because she was saying in this interview, this was the theme of what she was saying, was that global warming was a security issue, right? Yeah, okay, right, okay. Well, I'll just go and, put my head in something and whatever, trying to get my head around that. But it's any angle to sell a lie. And again, Caroline Lucas will not realize that that's a lie, and that global warming is a complete global con. She will not know that.
No, she believes it. I agree with that.
She will believe what she's saying.
Yeah.
Anyway, what Peter Sissons said to her in this interview was, but hold on a minute, the temperatures are not playing ball, are they?
Yeah.
Because they're not going up. And she said how disgusted she was that a BBC person should actually make that point.
Ask a question.
And Sissons says in his book that this went to the highest levels of the BBC about the way he handled the interview. And of course, we know, as he says in the book, it was decided by the people that control BBC News, and I mean control BBC News, that the science on global warming was proven, and therefore there's no need to give people that say it isn't any airtime. I mean, this is the state broadcaster is supposed to be impartial. So this is what is another pressure to keep even those journalists, and they are the few, who do wish to challenge the official story and to question more vehemently. That keeps them in line because they have houses to pay for and families to feed. And it's this kind of situation where the question of how I respond is what's right for me, that holds the system together. And at some point, these people are going to have to realize that the tyranny that they are reporting, actually misreporting, and what is coming into change society as a result of what is happening and how they are reporting it, that is going to impact on them eventually. And more than anything, it's going to impact massively, fundamentally, on their children and on their grandchildren. And there will be journalists who will see it, but are too frightened to do anything about it. And so what has happened is that this alternative media has grown up outside of the mainstream and outside of those pressures to conform. And what needs to happen now, and people say, what can we do? Well, there's lots of things we can do. One of them is that the alternative media has to build, if you like, its own separate reality. See, at the moment, the alternative media is interacting with the fake reality, i.e. it's getting income from videos, increasingly less, through YouTube and things like that. Well, what we need, not everybody to make a contribution to this has to be someone like me doing what I do or doing what you do. There are other things that people can do. Like if people are have an entrepreneurial ability, gift, then what we need to do is build structures and means through which the alternative media can fund itself. Because, when I started out, there virtually was no alternative media. It virtually didn't exist. But now it has access to a phenomenal global audience. And it's an audience that will respond to the right kind of, if you like, advertising things that will make a difference rather than advertising things that are part of the problem. And these things can be done because the point I'm making here is this alternative media has been created, and in multiple ways that I've described, and there are many others, the system is trying to destroy it. And therefore, when people say, what can I do? Well, they can support the survival and the, if you like, the expansion of the alternative media. Because if that goes, there's nothing left to challenge the official narrative.
Nothing.
There's nothing left to stop and challenge the perception deception, because the only information that people are going to receive is the official story. Therefore, their perceptions are going to and their actions or non-actions are going to reflect that official story. So we're at a point now where the alternative media is in the gun sights, and instead of blinking, we need to respond. And there's so many ways that people can respond, and there are opportunities for people in life in this arena too. But let's get into this situation where there's nothing we can do, because there always is, and into this mode of, well, it's not my problem. Well, if the alternative media gets crushed, it's everybody's problem, because that's the end of it. And I've not spent 25 years doing what I've done and will continue to do, and seen this alternative media emerge and expand and expand and expand, to see it crushed by these man-children. Okay, so what people can do is anything they can do to support the alternative media, support people who are struggling to keep going, because of all the pressures that are being put on them. Support people when they are censored, when they are banned. I mean, a lot of people have kind of supported me since this ban, but simply by making their thoughts known, if you like. But vast numbers of people who could be making a stand on this are not. Oh yeah, I see he's been banned for 5 days. Oh yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? Okay, and that's it. And
yeah, at the very least you could do there is, and I always say to people, if you can't afford to spend a couple of pounds a month with the Richie Allen Show, I completely understand that. I've been broke in the past, I totally understand it. You've been broke in the past, you understand it. But I say to people, what you can do is that you can make sure that the story that David Icke put out on davidicke.com about being banned is seen by people. It's very simple. It's 5 minutes out of your day to share it across social media. The same with the podcasts or the programmes. You're not powerless. You can be involved. Jamie is involved with Aaron with something which I think is a really good idea called unreportedtruths.com. You can write articles about these things. You can make videos with your own phone, become a citizen journalist and upload it to Unreported Truth and people will see it. You can do stuff. I'm so glad you said that. I mean, I didn't know you were going to get into this, but it's absolutely bang on the money what you're saying there. People are powerful.
I got into it, Rich, because it's so important. I mean, you don't have to be a genius if you're involved in the alternative media to look at the way the tide is running, and you can see what they're doing and you can see what they plan to do. And if people don't support and don't do the kind of things you're talking about, I mean, what does it take to share a video? What does it take to share a story or a picture, an image?
It's the least people
can do. Takes nothing. And we've got to get active. Everybody has got to get active. You know, as this has unfolded through this 25 years that I've been involved, I've been saying to people, I know you don't like what's happening, but it's a fraction of what they plan. You know, and you can now see this ante being upped all the time. I mean, I've been talking for years, of course, about this Albert Pike Third World War.
Well, just before you get into that, can I ask you? Can we just do a really quick break? We got to get a really quick 90-second break in, if that's okay. I don't think we're going to do news at the top of the hour, are we? I think we'll forego the news. What do you think? It's up to you. You're the guest now. You're on for a long time.
Let's keep going. What's the news going to tell us at the time? Especially at this moment. It's going to tell us what we're supposed to believe.
Exactly, right. So we'll forget the news. Right, we're going to take a quick 90-second break. When we come back, we'll hear about Albert Pike and we'll talk more with David. I will read a few tweets as well because I'll get hammered. There's lots of tweets, obviously, and loads of questions. There's one common question about Putin coming through. We will put that question to David shortly. There's PayPal and bank details there. If you can't, do what David said and share a video, share a podcast, talk to people about this programme. Go to davidicke.com/headlines. I say every night and I'll say it again. It's the only place for terrific insight and analysis into the stories coming out of the mainstream media and the independent media. And just before we let David back in and we talk about Albert Pike, I got to mention a few tweets and a few emails. I want to say hi to Justine Hughes. She's in Anglesey. Loves David. He's a fantastic speaker. She says, please pass on love and good vibes to him. Now, there are many, many messages like that. I want to say hi to Terry, to Tez in Salford, to Karen, who talked about drones and Amazon when David was talking about Amazon, to Kylie Tucker. How you doing, Kylie? To Shan, to Martin Houston, to Scott Cornish, everybody who's on, Joanne and Steve, Clayton, to Sparkle, to Andrea, Mike McCusker, to Sam Hill, to Angela. If I don't read your name out, folks, it's not because I'm a louser. It's because there's so many of them. To Marisha Kotevska. How you doing, Marisha Kotevska? Nice to hear from you. Gary Clucky, of course, in Scotland. Val Kyrie on Twitter. Peaky's son, Paul Grimes. I could be here all night. Wayne Smith, Paul Jackson, how you doing? All of you. And I think our great friend Andrea Davison is listening in as well. Andrea, lovely to know you're listening in on the other side of the world, all the amazing things you've done to get the truth out there. David, loads of questions. I know you're going to talk about Albert Pike now. But bear in mind, there's been a lot of questions about the position of Vladimir Putin and his place in the whole drama. What he's going to do and what he isn't going to do. Is he on the side of truth and decency? Is he not? I'll get your opinion on that, of course, shortly. But back to where we left it before the break, my friend.
Yeah, I was talking about the fact that wherever we are is not where it's meant to be. We're always on the road to where it's meant to go. And for reasons I go into in some depth in this new book, and I explain how it's possible, this whole scenario that's unfolding now has been planned for, well, hundreds of years, but certainly been planned since the 19th century. And there are reasons why that's possible, and there's reasons why it can be done. And to give you, well, in the book, I quote a guy, an insider, who way back was describing the internet. And the internet was what? It was invented in the 1980s, wasn't it?
So we're told.
He was talking about it 20 years earlier and describing it. He was describing smart TVs. He was describing them and how they worked and what you could do with them. This is way back in the 60s, and I quote the guy in the book saying all this. How does he know about something that's not even been invented? Because, as I said earlier, this goes far, far deeper than almost anyone, even in the alternative media, has yet grasped. And once you get into those deep depths of the rabbit hole, you can see what is happening with crystal clarity and why and how. And B, you can see how you can bring an end to it, which is why this next book is many parts of it are about what people call solutions. And
when can people get it? When can people expect it, David?
It's going to the printers in the next 2 weeks, I hope. So it will be out January, February.
Brilliant, good stuff.
This is an example. This Albert Pike letter. It's controversial because people say it doesn't exist, and other people say it does exist. But for those who have not come across it, it is alleged to have been a letter written by an American Freemasonic hero, bigwig, Albert Pike, Supreme Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry. He's supposed to have written it in 1871 to an Italian mafia cabal guy called Giuseppe Mazzini, in which he outlined 3 world wars. Now, of course, he outlined the First World War in a way that was true. He outlined the Second World War in a way that was true. But the letter is alleged to have come to light through a book called Satan, Prince of This World by a guy called William James Guy Carr. He's an English-born Canadian naval officer who brought the letter to light in 1959. So, in terms of credibility, you can forget the First World War and Second World War because, although they were accurately described, they could have been made up because they'd already happened. So the key to its credibility is the Third World War, which was described, which had not, of course, happened in 1959. This is what Albert Pike said about the Third World War. Very interesting when you apply it to current events. He said, the Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agenteur of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the State of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on the issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists, I'll come to them in a minute, and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization. And the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally into the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. So he talks there about unleashing the nihilists. And one definition, dictionary definition of nihilism, is a political belief or action that advocates or commits violence or terrorism without discernible constructive goals. And what you are looking at is a playing out. Well, everyone says about this letter in terms of its origins, you're seeing the playing out of what was described there. You are seeing the creation of turmoil, conflict, bloody turmoil, destruction, death on a big scale, to get the public into such a state of fear, such a state of inner turmoil, that they will agree to anything to protect them from what Pike called the unleashing of the nihilists. And of course, the nihilists, ISIS, IS, whatever they want to call themselves, and others like them, are controlled by the same people who are saying we must stop them. And this is the biggest deception of Paris and what is happening in the world now. I came up with this phrase a long time ago: problem, reaction, solution. The problem has been created by arming, funding, and training these crazy people to be unleashed on the population, so that those which have created them can then come out in a war against them, creating this turmoil and conflict and Third World War, which they want to bring about a completely transformed global Orwellian society. When you look at what they want a global Orwellian fascist state well beyond what even Orwell envisaged. And they want to acquire the world through war and acquisition and conflict. If you look at Paris, given what these people want, you might say if it hadn't have happened, they would have had to invent it to get what they want. You know, those skeptics about the fact that it's all manipulated should ask themselves about, they talk about conspiracy theorists, how about coincidence theorists, that all the time, every time that these events happen, the solution is to change society in precisely the way these people want it changed, precisely the way I've been describing for 25 years they want it changed.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more and more blatant what is happening. And when people say, well, hold on a second, but what about these Muslims involved? If you think of a multinational company, you are on the shop floor, you are carrying out, you are the final point where something is done, be it a product made or whatever. You have someone above you who is telling you what to do and guiding what you do. They have someone above them guiding them and what they do. And eventually you reach a point in a company, a major company, where that on the bottom floor, even that on the floor above, have no idea where it's coming from. It's just coming down. Oh, well, it's come down from on high. We better do it. Well, these false flags, these problem reaction solutions, not always done like this. They can be complete hoaxes, but they are structured or can be structured and are structured in the same way. You've got people who play it out, who actually believe that they're doing terrorism for Allah, and they're going to end up with virgins somewhere in the other world. They actually believe that.
Yeah, those people exist. This is an important point. I'm glad you're saying that.
And they're used, but they can do in terms of what is perceived to be evil. How bloody stupid must they be to be more stupid?
Yeah, Muppets.
You know, bits of kids or convicted criminals or whatever. I mean, why do they responsible when they are actually responsible? This is how it works. And it's because more and more people are beginning to grasp this, conceive that those that are supposed to be representing you and protecting you are actually behind the attacks upon you, because that gives them the excuse.
There's a lot of narcissism in the independent media. There are a lot of people in it to get famous, David, or to get well known, or to be liked.
Creating a nightmare for themselves later in life, not too later either. And of course, they're turning on the mainstream media as well in terms of censorship and control. And they're creating a nightmare for their children and grandchildren. Now, that's no different in the old. You are part of the problem, not the solution. And it's very easy. I see this all the time, Rich, that it's very easy to look inward and not outward. If you're not constantly aware of the bigger picture, the nature of reality, how we are all one consciousness experiencing itself in multiple points of attention, then you can get caught in your personal bubble. I remember when I was at the BBC, I couldn't stand it, mate. I couldn't stand it. The BBC bubble. You couldn't have a conversation in the bubble which wasn't about who was having it away with who was going to get the next job, what jobs were coming up, what so-and-so had said to so-and-so. This is in newsrooms, mate. And it's like, it's the bubble. They're not looking outward. They're not seeing the picture. They're looking inward. So the mainstream media is like that. Parliament's like that. If you ever go into Parliament, it's even built to look into on itself. And the alternative media is the same. It can get caught in the bubble. Oh, have you heard what so-and-so said about so-and-so? Oh, what was it? And you know what he's done? Look the other way, mate.
That's it.
Look the other way. Look at what's unfolding. It's not a game, right? It's real. Excuse me. In terms of the way it's playing out, not real in the way we're experiencing it, but it's real in the way it appears to be playing out. And if you go on looking inwards in your particular bubble, you're not going to ultimately change anything. it's so important that people look outward and not inward, because if they do, they're going to get caught in these squabbles. I mean, through my life, I have had so much abuse from so many people, and what's happened is the people who abused me years ago, and a lot of them in the alternative media, by the way. It's very little different to me than the mainstream media in terms of abuse of me over the years. And then those people disappear because you wear them out. Because all you're doing is going boom, 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 walking forward, seeing the big picture, seeing that the outcome you are doing everything you can to avoid, to make sure it doesn't happen. And ignoring what people say about you, what people do about you, just bang, bang, one foot in front of the other, forward. And you wear them out because, they hurl their abuse at you. It doesn't have any effect, water off a duck's back and all that. And so they go away and another lot come in, and then they go away and another lot come in. When I look back at my life, it's hilarious.
Keep really. Seeing them off. It's funny.
The abusers that have come in and then gone out, and then the next lot have come in, the next lot have come in. But
it's like a carousel of idiots.
To hold the big picture. The big picture is this. If we do not come together in some kind of unity and mutual support, if we do not become conscious beyond the program, which is something I go into big time in this new book, because most of us are living a complete false sense of identity, never mind a false reality. If we don't become conscious beyond the program, this is going to reach its conclusion, because it can't do anything other than do that, because it depends for its success on the vast majority of people not becoming conscious beyond the program, therefore not able to see the program. They take the program to be real. And this is the bottom line. And therefore, any conflict between us and mutual undermining is just playing into the hands of the very force that the alternative media is supposed to be there to head off and to expose. So the alternative media has done a fantastic job up to this point, but it needs to move on. It needs to grow up. It needs to become far more mature in many areas, and it needs to see the big picture. If we don't come together, we don't come into mutual support, if we do not become conscious beyond the program, then we're wasting our time, because the program must prevail. But we will, and we are becoming conscious beyond the program. We will come together in some kind of unity, because if nothing, events that are planned are going to focus our attention on that, and we will prevail. We will prevail. It won't be tomorrow, but we will prevail. But to do that, we've got to put aside me. We've got to put aside personal desire for fame or ambition,
petty jealousy,
or I know more than you, and all this bloody childish nonsense. We've got to put that aside, and we've got to say, okay, we agree this is happening. We might not agree on the depths of the rabbit hole from which it's happening, and that Icke does seem to be a bit far out in some of what he says. But let's come together on what we agree on, which is, for instance, 9/11. All we need to agree on about 9/11 is that it was created on purpose to provide the excuse for what has followed. That's all we need to agree on. We don't need to agree on whether this substance brought the towers down or these energy weapons. That might be interesting, but we don't need to agree on that. We don't need to argue over it. We don't need to come into conflict over it like children.
Yeah, it's madness.
All we need to agree on is the obvious. 9/11 was created as an excuse for all that's followed. Okay, got there. Let's move on. Again, it's seeing the picture and not getting caught in the dots and the bubble, because 9/11, Rich, in the alternative media has become for many people a bubble, arguing about whether it's an energy weapon or whether it's this bloody substance that brought the towers down, whether the planes were this or whether it was a bloody holographic illusion, all this stuff. It doesn't matter. It's interesting, but it doesn't matter. What matters is it was done as an excuse for what has followed.
Simple as that. Should we pause for a second? Let's pause. It's 21 minutes past the hour. David Icke is on with us, the great David Icke. It is imperative that if you want to find out more about the planned speaking tour, there's loads of dates announced already, and there will be more. I'm getting hammered, Icke, by people saying, is he going to come and do something in Dublin? Is he going to come and do something in Edinburgh?
Well, Rich, I mean, the thing is, I've said to Jamie, who's kind of organising the whole thing with people on the ground, that, the next 3 years are absolutely critical. They are, the eye of the storm, if you like. The next 3 years will decide the direction. And these next 3 years, I've been saying it for so long, 2016, 2017, 2018, these are critical years that we are entering now in terms of where this goes. And so I said to Jamie, let's go everywhere we can and get this information out. I'm calling it the Worldwide Wake Up Tour because that's what we need, a worldwide wake up, and a wake up on a much deeper level than just seeing 9/11 was an inside job. And so this world tour is open-ended. If the Australian government can get over its fear of me and let me in, I'll be in Australia, and then I'm coming to going to America, to New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, and then we're going all over Europe: Bucharest, Estonia, Amsterdam, Berlin, all over the place. And then I'm going to do. And I'm starting off, of course, in London in June. We're back at the Shepherd's Bush Empire, where the Wogan show took place.
Brilliant, that is.
I think it was just a very symbolic moment because it's 25 years since the Wogan show this coming 2016 summer. And then I'm going to do Manchester in early 2017. But from then on, it's open-ended. It's open-ended. So I'll just keep going. As the opportunities come up to speak, I'll just keep going, because the next 3 years are absolutely crucial, and it's this point is so crucial because it's so perfect. When I look at my life and how this started for me consciously started for me in 1990. When I saw Betty shine and was told that I was going to go out on a world stage and reveal great secrets and all this stuff that has all happened, and the way my work has gone into the nature of reality and the fact that we live in a simulation. Which even many mainstream scientists are now beginning to say, hold on, the physics look like it's a simulation. It is. When I look at what's happening in the world and everything, we are almost in the opposite of a perfect storm, because you can explain the nature of reality now, which we absolutely must have a grasp of to understand how the conspiracy works, because they know how reality works. They're just trying to keep it from us. That's why science is such nonsense. We now have the perfect time where technology, Wi-Fi, computer systems, etc., is mirroring the very reality that we're experiencing. So the tools are there to explain the reality we're experiencing that people can immediately grasp because they're actually interacting with the technological version of it all the time. And we have reached a point in this unfolding exposure of the conspiracy, where the conspiracy has reached a point where it has to make itself on public display. Because
this is it. We've spoken about this, yeah.
I've said for years and years and years, there will come a point where the hidden has to become the seen, because if it doesn't, it will not change society in the way that it wants to. So there has to come a point where what has been manipulated in the unseen has to hit the scene as changes and happenings in the world start to manifest what this force wants the world to be. We are in that point now, and will be more so in the next 3 years, where people will no longer have to be persuaded that this is coming, because they'll frickin' see it. So all these strands are coming together, where people are finding it harder and harder to deny what is happening, where people are becoming more and more uneasy at what's happening. What's happening? What's going on? I don't like it.
Yeah, I hear it all the time. It's amazing you say that.
All these things are coming together. 2016, 2017, 2018. It's the perfect time. You know, the Chinese talk about danger and opportunity being basically the same thing. And that's what we're in. The danger is that the agenda is moving on. But because of what I've just described, we are in the perfect position to bring it down, because it is losing its prime weapon, secrecy, and a public that is not aware of what's actually happening. They're losing it, ironically, because they are bringing in what they want. And I describe this in the new book. They want a point to come where it will not be possible to become conscious beyond the program. And they have a name for it: transhumanism, which I expose in enormous depth of the rabbit hole in this book.
It's massive, isn't it? Transhumanism in the book. I am going to call a halt now and take a quick break because I have to, and we'll come back in a second.
You've got to have a break, mate.
We got to have a break. Have a break. Yeah. And the book, of course, as David said, is going to the printers, and it should be available in January or February. We'll let you know about that. All the details on the tour are available at the moment are on davidicke.com. David's going to stay with us. We've got about 25 more minutes left. He will give us his thoughts on Vladimir Putin after the break. One or two of you asking me to press David on Putin and on other leaders whom might be working within the system to try and call a halt to it. That isn't impossible, I don't believe myself, but what do I know? Since the inception of the programme in 2014, have made a contribution. There's no such thing as too small. Somebody said to me on Twitter today, what would I suggest? I'd suggest nothing, because these are times, because of austerity, because of brutality, because of Atos, because of PIP assessments and everything else, people don't have money, and I totally understand that. So there's no such thing as too small. And like I said, there are other things you can do for programmes like this anyway. One of those things is to share it around on social media. It's 29 minutes to the top of the hour. To every one of you who's tweeted, thank you. Too many of them to read them individually. I want to say hi to Fiona. Thanks, Fiona, for your email. Fiona says that the arguing about the basic details of 9/11 is spot on. David is right. Why do we get bogged down by the detail? Asks Fiona. Thanks very much for that email, Fiona. I'm just picking out one or two at random now. But a number of you have just tweeted, and as I said, you can see all the tweets by putting in Richie Allen Show, all one word into the search Twitter bar, and then every single tweet that's come in during the programme comes up and you can see what people are saying there. So, David, guys working within, guys and gals, shall we say, men and women, working within the system in positions of prominence, who might have a conscience and who might be trying to kind of halt the gallop, as it were. Is Vladimir Putin one of those men, or is he not? What do you think?
Well, there will be some, but of course they're working within the system, and that is a ball and chain to anybody. But let me just quote an insider who I quote in the new book. And he's talking about politics. This is an insider who knows how it works, or knew how it works. He said that very few people really know how government works, something to the effect that elected officials are influenced in ways that they don't even realize, and they carry out plans that have been made for them, and they think that they are the authors of the plans, but actually they are manipulated in ways they don't understand. He went on to say that most people don't understand how governments operate, and even people in high positions in governments, including the American government, don't really understand how and where decisions are made. So let's look at the people around at the moment, and then I'll get to Putin. Cameron, man-child, not a bright man at all, total puppet but a willing one. Barack Obama, man-child, not a bright man, total puppet but a willing one. Hollande, man-child, not an intelligent man, a puppet and a willing one. Angela Merkel, different, knows far more and is higher in the hierarchy. Angela Merkel is the one who, to the amazement, I think, of everybody, particularly people in Germany, just opened the doors to unfettered immigration in the last few weeks.
Yeah.
And people in Germany are shocked. They don't know why. Well, this is why. They want to create a Europe. Two things to this. First of all, they want to create a Europe that has no countries. They want the European Union, the central bureaucracy, fascist communist bureaucracy, and then weak regions with no power doing the bidding of the central bureaucracy. The big block on that is a sense of nationhood, a sense of national identity, a sense of national culture, a sense of being different. That is a massive resistance to the end of countries. So the plan is, I'm not saying this now, I've been saying this for a long time. The plan is to break down that sense of nationhood, that sense of national identity. And the reason that Germany is getting all these migrants beyond what other countries are getting, and the reason that Angela Merkel, front person for the cabal and knows it, is as enthusiastically allowed it, is because Germany has such a sense of national identity, such a sense of what it is to be German, that needs the treatment more than anyone else in Europe now, to break down that sense of identity, to break down that sense of a unique, identifiable culture. That's why it's happening. And the migrants being allowed in are being used as pawns, just as the German people who are having these people come in vast numbers are pawns of the same game. They're both, if you like, victims of the same scam. And Angela Merkel knows about that. The other thing about migrants, before I get on to Putin, is that they want to create conflict and upheaval and infighting and the indigenous population at war with the migrants and all that. And what has happened in Paris, of course, will do much to increase that. I mean, you look at opinion polls, how opinions apparently seem to be changing. I've got today's Daily Mail here. Front page says, we should bomb Syria, say 60% of Britons. And it actually says here, Mail poll reveals country's reaction solution to Paris carnage. And what's happening with the migrants is having the same effect because of the sheer numbers and creating conflict and upheaval, which is exactly what they want in Europe. So Angela Merkel is absolutely knowingly doing that. So then we come into Putin. Now, is Putin a nice man? Well, look at his history. I don't think so.
No.
Is Putin more intelligent than Cameron, Obama, and Hollande? He's probably more intelligent than all three of them put together in terms of his grasp of a situation. And I think what happened with Putin, and again, let's go back to that quote, a lot of these people, even the highest positions, they don't actually know how these decisions are being made. I mean, one of the most manipulated politicians in British history was Margaret Thatcher, because all you had to do was make her believe that it was her idea and she'd support it, even though it was someone else's. This is how it's done. But Putin could see the way the land was lying. You've got to go to Ukraine, first of all. They want a war with Russia. I've been writing for years that this Third World War that Icke talked about is planned. We don't want it to happen, but it's planned, it's the plan, to be the West involved in a conflict with Russia and China. And now we have a situation in the Middle East where in a very small area of land, you've got Russian planes bombing in support of Assad. You've got Chinese advisors there in support of Assad. You've got Iranian advisors there in support of Assad. And in the same piece of land, you've got the US, you've got France, and of course, I want a war. I'm Tony Blair. Cameron is desperately trying to get British bombing in the same area of land. I mean, how many planes do you need to bomb that area of land? So you've got a potentially combustible situation there. But what Putin could see was that the gun sights were turning on Russia through what happened in Ukraine, which was a United States instigated coup. And the guy put into the leadership in Ukraine was a long-term American asset. This has come out in documents and Wikipedia revelations. So they put their man in place, and they want a war with Russia. They've tried to do it over this situation in the Ukraine and this ludicrous problem reaction solution of the MH17 and the official narrative trying to blame it on Russia. And he could see in Syria that what was going to happen. What Putin has shown since they've started operating in Syria is that the American so-called fight against ISIS wasn't a fight at all. They weren't even trying. ISIS was being used to bring down Assad. This is why these so-called moderate rebels, I love it.
Hilarious, isn't it? Moderate rebels.
Funded to a fantastic extent. It's all admitted now. And all those arms and all those people that were trained were then moving to ISIS. They were just supporting ISIS through moderate rebels. It's so blatantly obvious now, and always was from the start for anyone with a brain. And so he could see that. I mean, Russia have got bases and naval ports on the ocean side of Syria, and he could see that they were going as ISIS continued to make more and more ground, because no one was trying to stop them really, apart from Assad's military. And so he's gone in to stop that. That's fundamentally part of it. And where it goes from here, who knows? I mean, Vladimir Putin is a typical I want power at all costs leader. But what he is, at his level of the pyramid anyway, is intelligent enough to see where that was going. And, the whole plan for ISIS was not just to come into Europe, as Vladimir Putin well knows, it was to go into Russia as well and do the same. So he's acting in Russian interests, but he's someone at least who has a grasp of the bigger picture on that level to see the way the water was flowing. And he couldn't leave it any longer, or it would have been curtains for those Russian bases, etc., and the Russian presence in Syria. And with that, it would have been curtains for Assad.
Yeah.
And so, Putin is someone who's more intelligent than most of them, but he's still part of the system. And before we start judging, good guy, bad guy, this is a big mistake that people make. They judge good guy, bad guy at this point. But hold on, this point is not where it's supposed to end. You can only start to make real judgments further down the road where you see where it goes from here. We can only look at the way things are now and see Putin in a certain light because of that. We might see him in a different light further down the road. And so, making dogmatic judgments and instant proclamations about people and what they're doing is fraught with disaster, because what they're doing is leading somewhere. And when we get to that somewhere, we'll be able to understand what's happening now with a much greater clarity than we can now. It's we've got to observe, and then we'll see the way it goes. But I personally, I don't like anyone killing anyone. But I'm glad that Putin has gone into Syria on that level, because without that, then Syria would have been taken over completely by these people, and these people being a proxy army for the United States and NATO. So at least that's been headed off. But it's a powder keg now, and in that way, it's not a good thing. But you have to look at things as they are and not as you would like them to be.
Yeah, and as you said, the next 2 to 3 years are massive in terms of the way it's unfolding. We regularly throughout the programs, people saying, what's going to happen with the migrants, Richie, what do you know? And I say to people, look, I don't know anything. I only know what I see and what I believe. And what I believe is not because you told me to believe it. You, highlighted the evidence. I looked at it dispassionately and objectively and agreed with what you said, David, which is that driving the migrants into Britain and into Germany and into Poland and those countries to overwhelm public services in those countries, to divide and conquer. I absolutely believe it. It's interesting. A couple of stories came out today. We really won't have too much time to get into them, but folks, you'll be reading about these stories on davidicke.com/headlines tomorrow. David has been talking about for years about how guys like George Osborne sell off every last bit of worth, every last state asset from the country to private industry, private business. And there's not much of it left now. But today it was announced that one of the big private security companies in the country, G4S, is saying that, well, we could save the government £1 billion a year if we took over the backroom administration stuff of the police. Now, anybody who's been reading David Icke for 25 years can go back to his early books when he talked about how corporations would eventually take over the police, basic services, prisons, schools, and we've had Sean Bloor and teachers on talking about that here. That's some story that today, David, and it's not unrelated. You did a great Doc Connecting series, which is on YouTube, on the David Icke YouTube channel to watch. None of that is unrelated. And that kind of story slips under the radar, doesn't it, when everybody's focused on Paris,
It's kind of funny, Rich, because in this new book, I write about this, and I mentioned G4S in relation to the police and stuff. It's not even gone to the printers yet, and they're bloody moving that way. But then again, it was obvious. See, this, I keep saying, goes so deep and is so detailed because of where it's coming from and how it's being created. And you can't talk about G4S taking over the police without talking about the trade agreements, the transatlantic, trans-Pacific trade agreements, which are being kind of agreed. In other words, people from the political side are being told what they're going to agree in secret. And it's being done in secret because if the people knew what they were coming up with, they would be aghast and shocked. So they want a done deal before the aghastment and shock can manifest. And so what you do is you constantly privatize. And what does that mean? You're taking control of whatever it is out of any even lip service controlled by the people. When we had energy companies that were nationalized, then there was some kind of government control system of prices and stuff like that, if that was the decision made. Once you put it not only into private hands, but into foreign private hands, where their headquarters is elsewhere, you are taking control of energy and these other services, water, all these basic services. You're taking them out of control of government, all these bloody, organizations to police the energy corporations and the water corporations. Just a joke, and it's only there because to give some idea that there's some kind of control. There isn't, not really. And so you put these basic services into private hands. You put the police into private hands. And then what you do through these trade agreements is you give almost total power over what those corporations do to the corporations through these trade agreements. So that you create a world court, for instance, where governments can be prosecuted under these agreements for taking actions and passing laws that are good for the people but bad for the corporations.
Now, that's called, by the way.
So what we're seeing is this transfer of not just basic services but many others to corporations from the people called government, in theory. And then we're having the trade agreements, which are giving total power to the corporations and stopping the governments having any influence or control over the corporations. So suddenly you are in a corporate-controlled world. And these corporations are obviously owned and run by psychopaths, most of them anyway, so they couldn't care less about people. And ultimately, when you go into the spider's web, they are owned and controlled and dictated to by the same force. So what you're doing is creating this society of corporate private control, but the same private, if you go deep enough in the rabbit hole or deep enough in the web, that are taking over the world. So you've got corporations controlling finance, you've got corporations controlling water, rather a basic commodity for human beings. You've got corporations increasingly controlling food, as other producers are being destroyed economically and through legislation and bureaucracy. And you've got corporations taking over all the basic needs of human existence. And these trade agreements are taking control of those corporations out of the hands of governments, so the corporations become a law unto themselves. This is the world unfolding. Again, it's been done step by step by step. You start with globalization, so you build these global corporations with a global reach. Then you have these corporations take over basic services. Then the trade agreements give them total control over the basic services above anything that governments can do. This is what's unfolding before our eyes. And it's something that has been planned for so long, it would make people's hair curl if they realized how long.
And it goes to the heart of something you said earlier on as well, about it being no longer being hidden. It's there now, or it's just about there for everybody to see. You mentioned the investor trade settlement disputes, which should really scare the wits out of any right-thinking man or woman. The idea is that, a corporation could say, well, your democratically elected government has done something that we don't like, so we'll take it to an international tribunal, and the decision of that international tribunal will be binding. So you're going to have to put up with it, Icke, And as you said, it's some secret,
Very, very, very important. It's very topical.
Yeah.
Paris, just by coincidence, nothing to worry about, is about to host this climate change fest of lies and manipulation.
10 days from now, yeah.
And of course, it's in Paris. And then we've got the football tournament, the International European Football Tournament in France in the summer. Again, because it's in France, because it's in Paris, terrorism will always be the underlying story of these events. But what's planned in this climate conference is, and they're talking about it now, and what's prompted this is what you talked about there, about binding decisions of courts. They want binding agreements to fight human-caused climate change, which isn't actually happening. Climate change, yes. Human cause, no, except that uses weather-changing technology, which is now extremely sophisticated. So they're looking at binding agreements. When the UN came up with the updated Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, supported by the Pope from the cult of Babylon, they wanted binding agreements on national legislation in support of this 2030. They want binding agreements of national governments in support of this climate change agenda. And they're having binding agreements in the trade agreements, the transatlantic, transpacific trade agreements. What's happening before our eyes is that the center of the web is having binding agreements to dictate its agenda and to dictate the direction of the world and the nature of the world upon everyone in the world through this network, because they're all connected. They're all coming from the same source with the same goal. And, there comes a point when people have to stop running. Let's stop running away anyway. They have to start running at it. They need to look this monster in the eye and not blink, and that's the point we're at now. It really is. And what I said earlier, this next 3 years are going to be absolutely critical. They are going to not only decide the future of human society, they are going to decide the future of what we call human itself. Not because the transhuman agenda will be a done deal by 2017-18, but that decisions will be made upon the direction that will inevitably lead to what they want. And so, whatever people are now, whatever people are doing, whatever they call their job, whatever they call their name or their income bracket, we came into this world to make a difference. We came into this world to stop it being the world that we came into or we are going into. And thus, we all have a contribution to make. And if anyone says there's nothing I can do, they're lying to themselves or providing an excuse not to do what they could do. This is a time for backbone. It's a time for standing up and being counted. All these cliches.
But they mean something. They're all true.
They're all true. These are the years that will decide the if you like, the destiny of where human society goes. It can go into a prison like we can hardly imagine, or it can go into freedom and bring down the prison. And the good news is we are holding the prison together. We are in the position of building it. They can't build it. How can a handful of people in the shadows ultimately build a prison for 7 billion people? They have to get the people to build their own prison through divide and rule, through conflict, irrelevant conflict over race and religion, and all these divide and rule structures and schisms that are put into place to trap us. You know, we can't act like children anymore. This is not the playground. This is the prison yard. And the walls are being built around us. And if we do not now say, not what can you do, but what can I do, then how are we going to change anything?
I think it's...
We've got the numbers. We've got the numbers. Have we got the intelligence? We're going to find out. It's
a fantastic place to leave it. Time has come up on us again. We'd of course, both of us love to stay on here and chat, but we got to get the repeat of this out. A lot of people depend on the repeats, listening on davidicke.com and richieallen.co.uk throughout the night, depending on where they are in the world. David's book will be out in January, February. We like to think that we'll get the first interview when he's got the book published, so he'll be back on. Find out more about the tour that David is going to undertake next year at davidicke.com, and always stay with davidicke.com/headlines. That's where there's genuine, honest, insightful and terrific analysis of everything that's going on. I always say this, mate, when we talk, but for everything you do for the independent media, I mean, there are a lot of people out there doing good stuff and writing good articles and making good programs, and you're always there sharing their stuff and making sure that they're heard. On behalf of them, I want to say thanks for doing that, because there's not many other people doing it. And we appreciate those of us, who put this program together, your sponsorship of it, your support of it. I say sponsorship of it. You support it by streaming it and by putting it on davidicke.com. So I want to say thank you, my friend. I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Well, thanks, Rich. That's very kind. But I'm kind of always got my eye on information. There's one thing I want to say before we finish. Watch the cuts that are designed to discredit that being cut in the public mind so it can be privatized. You see these stories about police going on jobs on the bus because there's not enough cars, saying we're only going to investigate burglaries at houses with even numbers or whatever it is, saying, oh, we can't come to your burglary. Can you send us an email or Skype us? These cuts that are causing that are all designed to discredit the police as they currently are in the public mind, so that the public will be open to privatization, problem, reaction, solution. And that's what's happening with local councils. That's what's happening with all these cuts. They want to discredit that which they're cutting the funds from so it can be privatized, including the National Health Service. It's so easy to see through them when you know the techniques that they use.
Mate, that was brilliant. Thanks for doing it. Continued success to you. I know you have a lot of work to do now with the audio book and everything. We'll talk again, of course. You and I will talk privately, but we'll have you back on in the early new year when the book is out. Thanks for everything, David, and talk again.
No problem, Rich. All the best, mate.
Cheers, mate. Bye for now. David Icke on the line to us there from his home in Ryde on the Isle of Wight. Fantastic stuff. Really terrific. And thanks for all the stuff that came in, all the tweets and all the emails wishing David well. I'll pass those on to him.